I think one of the ways to live a happier life, and I mean, isn't that what it's about? To be joyful, to be happy, is to go, you know what? I'm not so good at this yet. And you know what? I don't know if I ever will be. I don't even know if I want to be. And then to be like, you know what? That's okay. Do I have to be? Is it absolutely necessary? And if it's not, maybe you just let that one go. And if it is, then you figure it out. You really work for it. If it's really, really important and you must figure it out, and it's the only way, then I think the answer is very clear. But if it's not, I think accepting it and letting it go is such an important part of the journey too. And like just going, yeah, I have a limit there. That's a limitation of mine. And
Hmm.
it makes you more honest. It's going to make you happier, and it's going to stop feeling like you have to push energy into stuff that you don't need to push energy into.
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte,
Identifying your blocks and demystifying your struggles
so that you can claim your own path.
and make your life a work of art.
Welcome to another show with Brandon and Evan, Way of the Artist podcast. All right. This one we're talking about our losses and our limitations. You know what? I don't even know where this one's going to go, but I think that there's some interesting things here. You're going to learn a lot from your losses in life and your limitations or your limits, which is probably part of this as well. They have a lot in them, that there's a lot of wisdom that can come from this. And I think that traditionally we might look at these things as a negative. And I think what we're going to try to do today is we're going to acknowledge that, but I think bring it to the positive, bring it to the side of transformation. And I think for myself, I'll just say that the transformation is a real gift, but transformation is very difficult, but also very necessary at times in life, because you just you won't do it when things are too comfortable. You won't do it when things are just status quo, and when everything's just kind of working. Why would you change what's working? um but if you have a calling or a vision or a purpose or something that's beyond where you're at, and you ask for that, i I find it common that, for me at least, I begin to run into my limitations. I begin to face my limits, and I also begin to experience some losses in various forms of all types. And they can be very difficult and challenging and even emotional to deal with. But when you come through them, you're always so grateful, and you see the necessity of them. Not always, sometimes that takes time. But yeah, I think there's a lot in that. So this is where I'm kind of looking to go with it. I don't know where we're going to go exactly, but that's where I assume it will go. What do you have to say, Evan?
Oh man, so much of what you said has already just sparked all kinds of ideas for me, um, about or presenting themselves for me in this conversation. Um, one is there is actually, which I didn't even realize at the start. So I was kind of thinking of these as almost sort of two separate kind of topics in one thing, but seeing that there's this very strong relationship where our losses almost or so often tell us about our limitations. They can reveal what our limitations are. And another thing, which might be sort of completely unrelated to what I just said, is something about what you were just talking about. What just flashed through my mind is the symbol of the yin yang. And I suppose I've been thinking about that symbol for a long time. For anybody who isn't familiar with the yin yang, you can look it up. But like it's like the yin yang is like a circle, and there's two halves to it. They kind of look like you know like
One's black, one's
one's
white.
black,
Or it
one's
looks
white.
like two fish, apparently,
Yeah,
right?
they kind of look like two fish
With
that
with
are
an
like
eye on each
are
one.
following each other. And yeah, and so yeah, one's black, one's white, and then there's a small dot of its opposite within its very center, right? And it's a tremendously powerful and wise symbolism of that comes out of Taoism, that talks about duality, but this sort of they together they make up a whole, and that they also contain within each of them an element of the other. And that's the aspect of this that I'm kind of really seeing as so interesting, because within these things of losses and limitations, two words that we I think that we often have a lot of resistance to in our lives, not just the words, but the meanings of those words, how those words actually operate in our lives. Like, loss and limitation is not something that we're generally comfortable with accepting or admitting. However, within each of loss and limitation, there is victory and there are gifts. And I think that that's such an important element, because we can often find massive victories within our losses, because our losses can reveal so much about ourselves. They can reveal our limitations. And very often our limitations actually reveal to us what many of our gifts are, right? And it can help us to shed a lot of things that we have been doing in our lives, the way that we've been going about things in our lives, that really don't belong to us, right? We did a podcast just, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago or something on what did we call that one? It's just like about, let me see if I can figure this out. Stop fighting with who you are. Right? And our losses and our limitations are often great guides to us for helping us see the people that we actually are, and dropping the baggage of other people that we're trying to be that we are not actually. So there's I hope that somewhat kind of illustrates this sort of how within each one of these things, as I'm seeing it, like there's these victories and there are these gifts that come with the losses and the limitations.
Yeah. The one thing that popped into my mind while you were talking was to lose, right? Like, to lose something would mean that you already had it. And so when you think about winning and losing, you can only win something if you don't have it, in a way, right? And you can only lose something if you already had it. And so these experiences of loss and win and such, they have an assumption they carry with them. And I think that's an interesting thing to look at. In sports, it's pretty simple. You can maybe look at it, but I think there's still some profound lessons in looking at that. It's like you felt like you lost. So if you felt like you lost, then you felt like it was your game to win, right? And so somehow the loss is that you had something and you no longer have it, right? It's like when I played for a winning team, we won the provincial cup and all of that stuff, got the gold medal, all those things. You did go into a game and you assumed you would win. And if you didn't win, it was a devastating thing. And it was unacceptable, actually. And so there was a certain amount of pressure to perform and to execute and all of that. I also played for a team that was an expansion team into the league. And I remember the game one, we were called the Gunners. And the newspaper said, Gunners gunned down in game one or something like that. And I mean, I went in with the expectation that we would win, but I quickly realized that we had a lot of work to do and a lot of learning to do before we were going to become a winning team. We had a lot to figure out. And I think we all realized that. And so the first half of the season wasn't so much about losing, it was figuring out how to win, and there's something in that. And I guess I bring this up because like words have a charge and they have a meaning and they carry with them something. And I think the feeling of our losses, we can take quite a negative look at them, and without really thinking about, what's actually happening here. And did I actually ever have this thing? And if not, then how did I lose it if I never had it to begin with? And you mentioned one thing about how we were talking about letting go of these people we're kind of forcing ourselves to be. I mean, you were never that person really. So when that ego dies off, if you want to say it that way, you never lost it, you never really had it. It wasn't really yours. It was never yours. There's nothing to lose. It's you in fact, you might look at it, hey, I won a more authentic version of myself. I actually gained something here. And that's a hard thing to wrap your head around because we're so often caught in our ideas of what we think things are.
Yeah. You just took some of the words that were going to come out of my mouth, which is like, yeah, like that stuff that you're talking about is like, it was all just an idea of who you are. Much like, like the team, and the sports analogy, I think works quite well for this conversation up to this point, because, like there's within, particularly like if you go to like the highest levels, but any really truly competitive league in sports, right? The expectation is to win. And maybe, like sometimes like you see a team that's like, okay, look, we're not even expecting to make the playoffs this year, right? Like let's set some expectations. However, there's still a different expectation that's there. It's like, we expect this team to get better. Mm-hmm. We expect this team to become a winning team, and we expect this team to become a team that expects to win. Right? Like that's kind of like the thing that that a team is working towards. And you can tell that, like, there is something when you see a really excellent team, in any sport, particularly within team sports, I find that it really illustrates this, but you see there is this attitude, within them where they expect to win. And even if they're behind, they expect to come back and to win it. And they very often do. And that has so much to do with culture and stuff like that. But it's, and that's an incredibly rare and extraordinary thing to see. But there's, so within that sort of journey, I guess you could say, between, maybe not being at that level but working your way towards being at that level, how do you figure out how to get to that level? It's through those losses. It's through having your ass handed to you, because they're going to start showing you where you're weak, right? They're going to start showing you where your limitations are, right? Even when you have two incredibly almost equally matched teams, like it becomes like it comes down to the smallest things, right? The smallest limitations within it's like, oh geez, okay. And they'll play into that, and you'll play into theirs. Like, what are their limitations? It's like, oh, maybe they're I'm thinking just hockey in my head because it's probably the sport I know the best, but it's like they know that third line defensive pair on the right side is, a little bit slow, right? You play into that because maybe it'll open up a small opportunity for you somewhere down the, like, that's the kind of stuff that goes into it. But at the same time, it's again, this sort of duality, this dualism that goes along with it, is that limitation implies strength as well, right? Like they go together, right? Like you don't have limitations without strengths, right? Like and very often by accepting our limitations, which is a part of this conversation that I really want to get into and dive into and see what we can find. But through accepting our limitations, it paves the way for us to actually tap into what our strengths are, because we can stop exhausting energy into places where we are not strong, right? And that doesn't mean that we don't learn, we don't grow, we don't get better at things, but we do have limitations. We do have things that we are naturally disposed to doing, right? And sometimes we have to work on those things, but other times we need to find a different way. We need to, instead of just trying to pretend that we're not limited in a certain way, we need to look at, well, where are we actually strong? Where do our gifts actually lie? And is there a way in which those strengths and those gifts can solve this problem in a different way? And I think that's huge. And just, I'll turn it back over to you, and because this is something that I've been thinking about for a little bit here in regards to this whole thing of limitation, is that I think that in our culture, we have this very conflicted relationship with limitation, because on one hand, we're somewhat expected to just like, no, you just work hard and you have to basically destroy your limitations. You have no limitations, which is a nice idea in some regards. It's a nice thought. It's an ideal thought to say that, like, no, you can do anything and you have no limits and you can da 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 da. And so that's one message that we receive, but at the same time, we also receive the message that, like, hey, different people have different strengths, and it takes different people to make the world go round, because some people are better at things than others. So it's like we're trying to we're living with these two things that we're trying to live up to, right, and recognize. And I would say that more often than not, we are trying to just pretend like we don't have limitations. And I think that the spin and the thing that I really want to come away with in this conversation is that those limitations don't mean that you can't succeed in something, but that, again, that the limitations are actually so often something that helps guide you to how you do something, right? As far as way of the artist goes, right? Finding your path. Your path is your own. It's not, there's no path that's the same for any single human being on this planet. And knowing our limitations is really, like, when you think about it, like 50% of knowing your way, of finding your way. Like, knowing your limitations as well as your strengths is like that it's a 50-50 deal, and they're each instructive to us.
Yeah, I mean, whatever you do, don't lie to yourself. I think that if you want to succeed at anything, if you want to do anything in your life, the more you deceive yourself into something that's not true, I mean, the harder it's going to be for you to get anywhere. And I think we all deceive ourselves a bit. I mean, I definitely have in my life, and I'm reevaluating some things about who I think I am and what I think matters to me and all of that. Um, I think something that comes up here is like, have you ever heard of the term leveling? So like leveling is when you take something that is strong here and something that's weak here and you try to balance it, you try to make it level, you try to like, and the problem is when you do this with people, when you undermine the strengths of someone else and you give advantage to the limitations of someone else to try and make it fair, you actually create something really really bad.
Mm.
And sometimes people want to do this because what happens is certain strengths, they get overpraised or overvalued by society or culture
Mm.
or family or friends or all sorts of things, right? And so people think, well, that's the most valuable trait or thing or whatever. And so it's not fair. This person has this huge advantage. And just because certain things are not acknowledged the same way that other things are doesn't mean they're not valuable, doesn't mean they're not important. I think when you play sports, I mean, most everybody when they start out wants to be the star player. They want to be the one scoring the goals and getting out, the one that's in the spotlight, right? I mean, I think most people in general, not always, but most, because that's the one that gets the recognition and the rewards and all of that. But as you progress in sports, if you want to keep going, you have to seriously consider, am I the star? And am I suited to be the star? Or am I better suited to be the one that's holding up the star, supporting the star, that's there facilitating the opportunity for the star? And if you can figure this out, I mean, not everybody needs to be the star. And if everybody's the star, then nobody's the star. And that's something you begin to realize, especially on a winning
Mm.
team, right? Because winning teams, I played pretty high division hockey, but I played very high division soccer. And I've definitely worked with a lot of people and know a lot of people who have played very high division sports. And the star role, it's like there's a certain there's a certain pressure on that, right? There's a certain, I don't know, like for example, we had a goal scorer on our team, and this guy scored the majority of the team's goals in soccer. And where things really changed for me as a player was when I, instead of trying to be the star and trying to focus on how I could be the star, I focused on how I could support the star. I became a much better player, and I scored more goals and set up a lot more goals and did a lot more things that were more useful for the team. And I think that led to me ultimately becoming a captain on the next team I played on. And maybe I'm a better captain, maybe I'm a better leader, better supporter than I am a star, at least in that sport, right? And
Mhm.
and that can be a tough pill to swallow because maybe you're very attached to wanting to be the star. You want that, those accolades, you want that acclaim, you want that notoriety. You know, um, just to give an example, I remember there was a tournament we went to, and we started the tournament. In the first two games, I scored 3 goals, which was a big deal because we were playing international teams. We were playing teams from all over the world. These are the best players our age, right? And so to start the tournament and be like a 3 goal scorer right off the bat, it put me in the top bracket of top goal scorers in the tournament. And, that was a pretty amazing feeling. But the thing is like, the difference between me and this other player was that he had he had the ability to show up with a certain kind of consistency that I didn't have, and he had a certain kind of speed and a certain type of poise, and I just didn't have that. Not yet. Maybe I could build it, maybe I could have developed it, whatever. But the thing is like, instead of trying to outmatch and make it competitive, look at something that has a strength where you're maybe not as strong, and make it stronger, make it better. And then look at where you have a limitation And instead of trying to fix it or alter it or change yourself, accept it and look at where you're strong instead. And, something I've learned in business is that you don't want to be spending all your time focused on your limitations and your limits, because what ends up happening is you get nowhere. You're trying to build yourself up in all these areas. Just pick an area and be strong in that area. And so in business, it might be like, if you're really good at sales, focus on sales. And if you're not so good at marketing, or you're not so good at some of these other things, get help, outsource it. And, if you go through life being a lone wolf, trying to do everything yourself, you'll undermine a lot of what you're capable of doing. At some point, it's better to get someone to help you who has strength in that area, and they can come in and they can fill in the areas and support you in your strength, and you can support them in their strength. And that's really how you get ahead. At some point, being a team with people is so necessary. I mean, we're getting into the weeds maybe a little bit here, but I think what I'm talking about is like, with limitations, don't look at it as a bad thing. Just look at it as like, okay, you know what? I don't know how to do that. I'm not as good at that. That's not where I excel. And that's okay. And don't make yourself wrong for it. But like, if you don't excel there probably is somewhere you excel, and you might not be seeing it yet. But don't assume just because all you're seeing is limitations that you have no strengths. And also another thing to keep in mind, and I'll just say this before I pass it on to you, Evan. You're the best on your team, for example. You're the best at this thing. Well, I guarantee you that you go far enough, you're going to find somebody that's better than you at that. And all of a sudden, what you thought was the strongest is now weak in comparison to this new person who has a much higher developed strength than you do. And so there is a constant relationship of humility. It doesn't mean that you're not strong, but you need to acknowledge when sometimes your strengths actually are limitations in another arena. And that's part of the expansion and growth of developing as a person.
Oh, man. Yeah, I mean, I don't feel like that was too much in the weeds. Like, I feel like that was...
Well, I pulled it back, I suppose.
That was all pretty on almost point to me. But I mean, oh, man. Yeah, there's so much stuff that I want to say. Like, it's one thing I just wanted to make a quick comment on is, you were earlier on, you were commenting on this sort of attitude that is I guess kind of climbing up through our culture, which is like, almost having to like dumb people down, because their strengths are just so, like I said, like I do think that there are certain things that are kind of over glorified, and so there's this sort of knee-jerk reaction to, it's just like, oh, well, we have to just like bring everybody down to the same thing because it's not fair. And it's like, well, no, what's really not fair is perhaps our over glorifying certain skills, traits, abilities, for example. And the problem is not, it's a disservice to just try and dumb down those things, because we still want those things to be functioning at as high level as possible, but we need to create space for others' gifts. You know what I mean? And just like what kind of, we're talking about sports, and like, sports is one of those things where, these are people who are being paid extraordinary, like at least at the professional level, people who are making extraordinarily high amounts of money. And then you look at somebody who, teaches children with developmental, issues how to speak, and and they're making a fraction. You're like, what the fuck is going on, right? Yeah. Like that's one thing where it's like, huh? Like there's something off here. So it's like, it's really creating more space and value for the gifts that other people are bringing, allowing a greater variety of gifts to be acknowledged and valued. Anyhow, and then there was something in what you were saying. I remember watching Simon Sinek one time doing a talk and saying like this company that he was in for a while, or it was just his company at some point, and he used to have to do pitches, right? Or he used to have to put in bids for certain contracts with companies and stuff like that. And he said like he would go into places and he would be just really honest. He was like, we're really good at this and we're really good at that. We're pretty good at this. We're not very good at this, or this. And he said, and we got hired so much because people just really appreciated that we were honest about our limitations. It created a sense of trust.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, as opposed to someone coming like, oh no, we're great at everything.
Yeah.
It's like, well, and it's interesting that in an operational level, that there's something that creates that distrust. It's like, well, hold on a second. You can't be great at everything. We're just immediately distrustful of somebody who claims that they can just do anything and be everything and whatever, because there's a part of us that just knows it's not true. It's like, well, and so there's something, it's to me, it says there's something else here about this honesty and acknowledgement of our limitations. Because there is this element of honesty and trust that comes out of it, that comes through it. I feel like there was something else that I wanted to say about what you said in all of those lovely things that you had to say. But man, it'll come back to me.
Made me think about it for a sec. I'll say this is, I think that there is a bit of a epidemic of narcissism that's going on, particularly in Western culture. And it's a pressure that comes from the media, and it comes from this perception of what it means to have a good life. And everybody's a little bit narcissistic in a form. Like, and if you say, oh no, I'm not narcissistic at all, well, then actually you're a very unhealthy person, because there's a certain amount of narcissism which is required to navigate this world in a healthy way. You have to look after yourself to some degree. You have to consider yourself to some degree. And if you didn't, the consequences for that would be deadly. And for people who don't, people who, are super just altruistic, everything's about everyone else. They get walked on. They usually live very depressed lives and things like that. But same for the people that walk all over everybody and don't care how they feel. The reason why I bring this up is because the pressure to be great, to be special, to be important, and all of that nonsense is, I think, a large reason why people don't want to have limitations, and they don't want to admit that they're not perfect and that they struggle and that they haven't got this part figured out. And I think one of the ways to live a happier life, and I mean, isn't that what it's about? To be joyful, to be happy, is to go, you know what? I'm not so good at this yet. And you know what? I don't know if I ever will be. I don't even know if I want to be. And then to be like, you know what? That's okay. Do I have to be? Is it absolutely necessary? And if it's not, maybe you just let that one go. And if it is, then you figure it out. You really work for it. If it's really, really important and you must figure it out, and it's the only way, then I think the answer is very clear. But if it's not, I think accepting it and letting it go is such an important part of the journey too. And like, just going, yeah, I have a limit there. That's a limitation of mine. And it makes you more honest. It's going to make you happier, and it's going to stop feeling like you have to push energy into stuff that you don't need to push energy into.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, as well, like it also might just mean that you have yet to discover the way to do this that plays into your strengths, right? As opposed to trying to play into where your limitation is, or and yeah, like it's hard to say because there's no hard and fast rules to these things. There are times when, yeah, it's like you might have to push yourself to grow and to expand your limitation in a certain area. But, at a certain point, it becomes just like, pushing a boulder uphill, and it's just like, is this really necessary? Like, is this actually really necessary? Is this level of pain necessary? Or is there a more creative solution based on the gifts that you have that can resolve the same issue in a way that is not only maybe simpler, or I guess even easier, but also, a lot more joyful to do, right? It did come back to me.
Okay,
so
well,
going into the old acting, analogies, right? Roles, right? The role of each character, and just within storytelling as well. Like, it's right. It's like you have all of these different characters, and they all have a role to play, right? And I think that this is not so dissimilar. We can look at anything that we do in our lives, and I think that this is a really interesting question to ask ourselves from time to time, right? Like, what is your role in your family? What is your role in your workplace? Right? What is your role in a grander scale and within the world? Right? Like, these can often open up some very interesting things, because not every single character in a story, is meant to do certain things. One role is meant to be adversarial, to point out to the hero where their limitations are, right? For them to overcome some of their limitations sometimes, or sometimes to acknowledge their limitations, right? Oh yeah, that's a whole can of worms right there. I'm gonna press for it. I'm not gonna go. I'm not gonna get diverted on that one for the moment, but and some roles, some characters in the story are there to help the hero to understand something, right? But they're not there to solve the problem. They're not, some of them are there to just support. And it takes all of these sort of roles to bring this thing together into one cohesive thing. And I remember seeing like an interview, it was John C. Reilly or something years ago. And because John C. Reilly was this actor who for years was always like a supporting role guy. Because, he's definitely not like what you would think of as a leading man, but he ended up becoming a leading man in a lot of stuff. And he always said that he always looked at those years of the supporting roles that he was playing as just, he put it as, I was always just committed to my little corner of the sky. It's like that this person was the central character in their own lives, right? And it's like, and it's sometimes that's an interesting thought experiment to be like, oh, like what if we followed that character? And very often you see that in like spin-offs in TV shows and movies. It's just like, oh, that was an interesting supporting character. Let's find out more about them. And then they become the leading person in their own way, right? So it's like, I think that we have all these different ways in which we're playing these roles that if we check in to see like, well, what are my gifts? What are my strengths? What are my limitations? And what does that mean for this environment, this set of relationships that I have where I can bring something to this, right? Like in your soccer team, in your football team.
Yeah.
Just to please everyone across the pond there. There's this person who is the clear, consistent goal scorer, right? Which means that that's their role. You know, like that means that in many of the situations, that's the person who you want to put the ball in the
100%.
hands of, so to speak, right? Like Michael Jordan, right? In the clutch time, get him the fucking ball.
Yep.
Right? We're not delivering it to other people very often. He's the clutch. But you know, I don't know anything about who this person was, but it's like, maybe they're a person who actually, if they got into a bit of a rut, mentally had a hard time getting out of it, or someone who's easily discouraged or something like that. Maybe you have a gift in being able to motivate, uplift, lighten the mood, like when everyone's just like a little bit too tight, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's a gift that you can bring into the locker room,
mm-hmm.
right? And that's something that you can bring that no one else can bring, right? Because that's a strength that you have. And then it takes the pressure off, right? It takes the pressure off. It's like, oh yeah, I don't have to be the goal scorer. I can leave that up. It's like, I'll put one up every now and then, but like you can step into those roles, and you often hear athletes in interviews talk about that, about how they learned how to step into certain roles. And especially throughout the evolution of an athlete's career as well, because when they started playing as a kid, they might have started playing as a forward, right? And then as they got older, it was just like, oh, you're actually kind of a big body. You're not as fast as everyone else anymore. It's like, okay, well, what? And so maybe now suddenly you're a defensive player, but you've got these sort of forward chops that make you a real good, you can move the puck real well, like out of your end. You can make that great first pass, or
different sports. You just throwing it in.
I know. I'm just throwing throwing everything out there at the wall, seeing what sticks. But you know what I mean? Like it's sometimes you have to make these pivots, right? Because sometimes you suddenly realize like, oh shit, I was hot shit scorer in this league, and in this league I'm not.
Yeah.
But what can you bring? And it's a reevaluation sometimes of your gifts and in the understanding of your limitations. And I think that so many of the players who end up making it professionally sometimes, like, yeah, maybe you thought that you were like that, and at a certain point you were that first line person, who was like, the flash player, and you end up finding your way professionally as being that like fourth line, grinded out, tough as nails, hard to play against, type of player, right? And you find your way through that sort of, I think, evaluation that doesn't negate your gifts. I think that a lot of time they come with you. They just go through a kind of metamorphosis. Hey everybody, this is Evan, and this episode is brought to you by my book. Yes, I recently released a book called The Actor's Awakening: Connecting Spirituality to Craft. Expand yourself as an actor and your craft through a spiritual perspective. Take a journey that will explore universal philosophies and insights to help you understand human nature in a profound way, and develop practices to take your work to another level. Again, that's The Actor's Awakening: Connecting Spirituality to Craft, available on Kindle and paperback on Amazon. And as always, if you like the show, please subscribe.
Yeah, the metamorphosis. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Because, there's a certain point, I think, where, particularly in sports, most star players don't end up as star players. And most of the star players are the people who end up making it professionally. It's usually the stars that move through. But if you get stuck needing to be the star, then you could totally like undercut your entire career. And I think that we have to adapt. It's even if you were to stay with the sports analogy, you grow and you change and you get older, right? So like when you're a young kid, you might have had a growth spurt and all of a sudden you're a really good player because you were just tall and fast. And so they're like, hey, great, this is the one. And then as you got older and things leveled out a little bit more and people caught up and maybe even grew taller than you and maybe they got faster than you had to change your game. You had to adapt. You had to figure it out. And you might not have that position anymore. And so, you learn something new, and it doesn't mean that you forgot what you learned from the last things. But then, as you go older into sports, you get older, your body ages, and so where you might have relied on speed, you don't have the same speed that you used to have, and so now your game has to change again. And you may still be a key player, but just a key player in a different way. And I think this, to take this out of sports, I mean, I think this is relevant for people in the arts and people for anything. I think the point is that you're honest with yourself, and I think that's what this conversation is coming down to for me in a lot of ways, is just like, don't pretend to be something you're not, because it will keep you from what you are. And your limitations are an important part of you finding out who you are, which is actually the really most important thing. And it's not so much even just who you are, but like the role you want to play and the role that you're best suited to play. And if you were thinking of it in terms of nobody's casting you in this role, like you're casting you in this role. And so something that I've come to kind of bring this around even more to a more personal level and a more like just a regular life. I'm not an athlete, Brandon. I can't relate. Okay. But just regular life. Maybe your values change. I found that's been happening for me over the last like decade. Just like my values have been, I don't know, like maybe they've always been there, but maybe the ones I thought I valued are getting kind of shedded away or cleaved off, or however you want to look at it. Like I'm losing them, right? I'm losing these things that I thought really mattered to me. And now I'm finding out, hey, you know what? This is what actually matters to me. And so that can be quite discombobulating. I don't know. It can be kind of like confusing, and you're just like, what do I do? What does this mean? But I think that as I find more of what my values are, I realize like, yeah, I don't want to do that thing I used to do. And I don't care about this anymore. I used to think I cared about it so much, and maybe I did at the time, but I just don't anymore. And so what does that mean? And what do I want to do? And my values and my personhood have changed dramatically. And I'm very happy with the person that I've become through being on this pursuit of relentlessly pursuing what matters to me. But I can tell you that at times it's not always an easy road, because it would be much easier to just be like, yep, this is what I do. This is what matters to me. I'm just going to keep my head down and stay on it. And, and I don't know if that is fulfilling for people. Ultimately, I don't know if that can work for some people. I didn't live that life. But for me, I found that as I've gotten older and lived life and met people and done different things, I've learned more and I've changed, and I've realized like things that matter to me are different than what once mattered to me. And it has opened me up to exposing new limitations. And so there are times where I'm like, oh man, I wish I was working on this like 10 years ago. But it's like, well, you didn't know to, because you didn't know you valued this back then. And now you just got to jump back in and figure it out. And that can be quite frightening. I'm sure for a lot of people, that's even why they avoid it, because they never want to experience that. But, I think as I've gotten older, I've also learned, okay, you're not going to be perfect at everything. You're just going to have to pick what you care about here and double down on that and go towards it and do your best at that. And if you need help, ask for help. And if you're struggling with this, there's someone out there who has that skill set and they can help you. And I'm constantly, I can be very much a lone wolf kind of person, if like this mentality of it's up to me mentality. And I'm actually trying to let that go, because that was a very, I don't know, it helped me in a time, but it doesn't really help me anymore. And as much as I like my solitude and I like my time with myself, I'm really learning to just be like, okay, I'm not good at this. Who is? Who can I call? Who can I talk to? Who can I message that's good at this? And like, I'm not gonna fight that battle. And let me put my energy into this thing that I really care about.
Mm-hmm.
And something that I find very interesting, like filmmaking. I'll just share this, Evan. I know I've been talking for a bit, but filmmaking is always something I think I'll love. I'll always respect the art and the craft of filmmaking, because it was such a gift for me in me finding my way. What I'll do with it from this point on, I don't honestly know. I really don't. But what filmmaking helped me find was vision. Because with filmmaking, I had to build a team to make a lot of the stuff I wanted to make. I wasn't able to do it on my own. And so I had to learn how to communicate to people what I wanted. And so something I think I'm quite good at is expressing my vision and describing that to people in terms of feelings or visuals or tones or modes or fluencies that don't necessarily align with technical stuff. But I can say, this is what I'm feeling, and this is how it's looking, and this is the flow that I'm going for, and whatever. And all that might sound like nonsense to someone who's very technical, but I can do this. I'm good at it, and I've done it successfully. And so like I've been going through this whole process of like looking at building say a mobile type of home and just building it from scratch and kind of going through that. And it's like, as I talk to people, they get excited about it because I express my vision. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't know how to put a toilet into this thing, but this guy does. And I was talking to a plumber the other day, Evan, and I was telling him my vision, and he's like, okay, great. He's like, you let me know when you have it over here. I'm going to help you build that. And I'm like, great. So I got a guy to do my plumbing and my shower and and it's just, I'm good at getting people enrolled into an idea and building a vision. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to build the toilet though, but I need a toilet. But should I learn plumbing now? Yeah. I mean, I could. I'm not adverse to it. I'm just saying, like, there's a point. You got to pick your battles, right? There's people that can help you do the thing.
Yeah. There are so many things in this world to do, to learn, and you can't do all of it, right? That is a human limitation.
Yes.
There's so much going on that you can't. It's not actually possible.
Or to be expert at it all. I mean, maybe you can learn a little bit of it all, but then, you do a half-assed version of what someone could do a great job of.
Yeah. And again, but like everything in the world, everything there is to know in the world, you won't even come close to being an expert in a small percentage of it. Yeah. It's one of the most futile efforts a person could possibly go about. But what do you actually learn and do? You put yourself to where you feel passionate, right? And what is joyful to you. I think that's always like the indication of where you go. And I think that an image that came to mind while you were talking was sort of like, it's like a lens, like a pair of binoculars or a telescope or something like that, right? Like, you've got to throw yourself into something, right? With absolute sincerity. You got to point that lens at something. But you have to point it there and look through it first so that you can begin to put it into focus, right? Because you can't focus on everything, right? Like, you have to dial that thing in. And I think that where I'm going with that is that only by kind of throwing ourselves into something with that sincerity, with real sincerity and real passion, that's when our limitations and our strengths begin to reveal themselves, right? Because we don't always know, right? We don't always know, but we start to figure some of these things out only through the doing, only through, and we have to be active in understanding these things about ourselves, acknowledging these things about ourselves, because if we don't accept the limitations and our losses as much as we accept our victories and our strengths, we're kind of going around half blind in what we're doing. Like there's sort of almost a willful ignorance there that's happening when we refuse to work with those things. And I think, again, like it comes down in my mind so much to creating a new relationship, like really just rewiring sort of how we think about loss and how we think about limitation, not as things that are in our way, right? Because they're not things that are in our way. They are things that are actually there to highlight our strengths, that are there to actually give us that crystal clear vision, that focus that we need to go into the directions that we truly actually want to go in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking, coming back to earlier in our conversation too about loss, is like, letting go of what it is that you think you have is such an important part of this as well, because like you might have an identity, for example, you're the star player on the team, then you get moved up a division or you get moved into whatever, and you're not the star. If you identify too much with the star, you think, oh, I lost that. It's like, well, it's not that you never had it. You played the part. You did the thing that you needed to do while you needed to do the thing. It's not a loss. It's you filled the role that needed to be filled at the time. And now you have a different role to fill. And it doesn't mean you won't be the star again. It doesn't mean that, you can't have what you want. But I think there's something about this that I keep coming back to with it. It's like honesty. You don't need to be anything other than what you are. And that's such a hard lesson to learn. It's just so hard to learn, especially in this culture that's telling us you got to be great, you got to be special, you got to be whatever. And if you don't, then you don't matter, and you don't get any of the good stuff and all of this, right? And so people, I think they feel a tremendous amount of pressure to live up to something other than what they are. And I think this is where the honesty comes in, is that you become okay with not being what everybody else is telling you need to be. And you go, okay, like, who am I? And what can I do right now? And then you do that. You don't worry about people's opinions of it. You do the best you can with it, and you don't worry whether people think it's good or great or whatever. Because if you look at that whole model too of like, I need to be somebody, I need to live up to something or whatever, it's so much based on some type of approval. And there's that saying, you live by their approval, you'll die by their criticism, right? And I think this has a lot to do with this talk as well. I mean, it's not as obvious. It wasn't as obvious on the onset, but it's more obvious to me now, because now you've lost their approval and now you're devastated, right? And now you're dying by their criticisms or whatever, or your criticisms. It might not even be theirs. It might be yours that you carry with you, And so if you're going to lose anything, lose that. Get rid of that. Get rid of that critical, judgmental voice of having to be something other than what you are. And that's no easy task, man. That's a difficult one to work out. But like the sooner you accept you, the sooner you can be real about your limitations, and the less you're going to experience of this whole loss thing. because loss is it's an attachment, right? It's like that saying in Fight Club, the things you own end up owning you. And that's kind of like what loss is, right? It's like, well, that owned you and now you lost it. And now you feel like you lost a part of yourself. And it's like, you didn't lose anything. If anything, like if you were a piece of stone and it's David under the stone or whatever it is, you carved away a chunk that didn't even need to be there. You didn't lose it. You got rid of something good. And it's like, reframe that in your mind, right? Like, it's not that you lost it. Like, yes, if all you are is a bland stone with no design and no meaning and no nothing about it, then yeah, the stone did lose the chunk. But if you see that you're actually this wonderful piece of art carved underneath it, and when something gets chipped away, you look at that as like, hey, I'm a little bit closer to what I really am. Then it ceases to be a loss, and now it becomes a discovery of self, which is a wonderful thing. And I mean, I'm working through that in my own life to keep reframing it that way and remember, hey, this is not a loss. This is me finding out a little bit more clearly who I really am and what this really is. And that's a wonderful thing, and I'll say this one last thing. If my values are more clear, it's easier to do that. It's when my values are confused, when I'm thinking I need to be something that I'm not and whatever, that's when that becomes loss, right? But when I'm like, oh, this is what I want, and this thing went away, well, this is closer to what I actually want, that's okay. You know what I mean? And I might have liked that. I might have been comfortable with that. I might have, been very attached to that. But it's like, hey, you know what? This got cut away for a reason. And that's helping me see more who I really am underneath all of this.
Yeah. And, some of what you're saying makes you think a lot of something I've heard from one of my favorite philosophers, Krishnamurti, who, has said many, many times something to the effect of, you have to die to yesterday so that you can live fresh, alive, with vitality today, with passion today. You have to die to everything that came before, always. Being in a process of continual renewal, essentially. And that comes with, I guess, sort of a loss, right? Like, it's just like, yeah, that day is gone, that day is dead, that yesterday is not coming back, right? And it's really clinging to it that creates all kinds of issues in our lives, that makes us, I think, sometimes unadaptable at times, because we're so hung up on all of these old and dead ideas that we have. And just as sort of like, yeah, like another thing that comes to mind is, like in the life of like a professional actor, right? Like much like an athlete, but as an actor, like you can't play the same role for your entire life. Like you can't, like if you been fortunate enough to have a long career in acting, like maybe you started when you were a teenager, right? You're not playing a teenager when you're 60.
No.
Like, it's just not going to happen. I mean, there is some pretty incredible wizardry, I guess, they can do now, but like, it's all, that side issue, sometimes that still comes off as very strange to me sometimes, but it's very cool. But at the same time, it's just like, no, but like, we expect you to be who you are, right? And no, you can't play the college student coming of age story anymore, but guess what? You do get to play the 60-year-old who's, discovering life again, or gets to be the wise voice to the person on this journey. Like, there's a whole new set of things that you didn't get to do before, as an actor, that you get to do now, right? So it's just, and that's a limitation that's imposed upon you. You know, like that's like there's really not much that you can do about it. You can't do anything about getting older. You're getting older. It's going to change how you look. It's going to change how you think. It's going to change how you behave. Right. And that's going to change the kind of stuff that you can do. Right. That people will go and watch and accept you as, you know, as an audience member. Right. And so what do you do about it? Right. What do you do about it? You can go gracefully with it, and you can move with it, and you can let it open up new opportunities, or you can fight it.
Plastic surgery.
But you know what? Like,
but it's a losing
honestly,
battle.
It is because it's like, to me, it's just like plastic surgery. I mean, running the risk of offending some people here. It's like, hey, look, I understand, and that's I get it. You know, like getting older and some of the things that come with it can be challenging to the ego and to the vanity, and I totally understand why people do it. But you know, for me, plastic surgery is one of those things where it's like, you don't look younger, you just look like you've had plastic surgery.
Yeah, well, let me just say something about that, because I feel like there could potentially be a lot of our audience who, you know, has got plastic surgery. My take on it is I've spent a fair amount of time in Los Angeles, which is like one of the capitals of that. And when done well, when done in little bits, mindfully, I think that they can do some really great things to enhance their appearance. I'm not saying that you should get it. I'm not saying that you shouldn't. I'm just saying that if like anything within reason, but when people start to get to the point where they're trying to run from who they are, and they're trying to do these things, and it's like you end up altering yourself in an unhealthy way. And I think that it's, you know, plastic surgery, like anything, like any type of solution we're trying to find to be whatever it is we think we need to be. I think you just need to be careful that you're not being sold into, you have to be something other than what you are. You know what I mean? And yeah. I think, there is everything within reason. Look, everything within reason. If you're gonna go down that road, I mean, there's no judgment. I think it's just a matter of try to not lose yourself in the world's expectations of you. You know, whatever you do, I think that's the thing. And it's not just with that particular medium. It's with anything, you know, don't get sucked into being what everyone else thinks you need to be, or this pressure that somehow what you are is not enough, and it's not good, and it's not real. You will find that, especially with beauty comes out of often self-acceptance. And through self-rejection, no matter how much you try to fix and tweak and do whatever you're going to do, you'll find that you'll never attain it. You'll never get to it, because you're constantly running from it, I should say. And I mean, this is a little woo-woo maybe, but there's an energy. You know, we give off energy, and there's a vibration. And if maybe you don't believe that, but the thing is like, sometimes consciously, but often very subconsciously, we're picking up on these vibrations that you're giving off, and these frequencies that you're at. And if you are fighting something, you're going to give that vibe off, you know, and it's going to come through your behavior. It's going to come through your words. It's going to come through everything. And so, you know, you can make a good attempt at it, and you might get away with it a little, but I think you'll find yourself in a lot of pain. So I would opt for, go for self-acceptance. Try to find peace with who you are as much as you possibly can, because you'll find more peace in general, and you'll be happier. And I think that this thing you're pursuing, I think at the end of the day, you really are after happiness and peace anyway. So just cut out the middleman. so to speak, and just get down to who you are, and let that be enough. And then you'll make better choices from there. Do whatever you're going to do. But if you make a choice from a place of self-acceptance, you'll make much better choices in what you do. If you're making a choice from self-rejection, it's your choices, and just look at your history. Your choices will probably not be as good.
Mm-hmm.
And make of that what you will. But that's kind of my take on it. If you're doing it out of a place of self-acceptance and self-love, and I want to enhance this thing because hey, look, like my cheeks are even prettier. I already thought they were pretty, but I can even make them prettier. And maybe that's what you're doing. I don't know, I'm just giving an example. Okay, that's a little bit better than, oh, I hate my cheeks, I need to change them, they need to be different. That place, it's a really slippery slope, a dangerous place to play in. So just try to work on that. If you're really not liking yourself, try to work that out before you try to find these external solutions to fix it. I mean, it even goes for, I'll get dentistry, even your teeth, right? I think having straight teeth is a great thing. But if you're changing your teeth because you hate your teeth, it's not for you, just for your mental health and your well-being, it's not as good of a place to come from. But if you see a value in straightening your teeth, if you're like, hey, you know what, like, I think this would be good, this is an inner honesty thing, man. No one can answer that for you. So I'm a lot in the film industry, and I know there's a lot of people who I've worked with and maybe listen to me from that spectrum. And, I know a lot of people dabble in that arena. So I just want to be very compassionate and mindful to people who are doing that, because I've seen great things with it that surprised me. And I was like, wow, you got work done? Wow, I had no idea. That's a good, and if you're happy, I'm happy for you.
Yeah.
But I don't want to see people hurt, and I don't want to see them hating themselves for nonsense. In this industry, the film industry, man, it can be just brutal. The model industry too, all of this, right? So just that's my, I don't know, just like a buddy, like a friend kind of saying, hey, look, you do you, but like, I just want you to be happy. I don't want you to be hurting,
Yeah, totally. Where it's coming from matters for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, look, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. That's just my take on it. Take it as you. Yeah.
Well, I figure let's wrap this one up. Let's
sure.
Quickly. I don't know if you've got a beer today or not.
No beer for me. I just have bubbly water.
All right. Well, then I will. I've got a beer happening here. I think this is probably one we've had at some point. But it's one from Lighthouse Brewing Company. I think they're in Victoria. Yes, they are. Lighthouse Brewing in Victoria, and this is their Shipwreck IPA, which is like one of their flagship brews that you can find, in store shelves, but in many restaurants and places like that. And it's great. It's a great IPA.
Awesome.
That's why it's a flagship. It's why it's a staple for them. Again, they're not paying advertising on this one. It's just having a beer, having a conversation.
Part of the tradition.
Part of the tradition.
I would have grabbed a beer, Evan, but you pushed our podcast an hour ahead. It's not your fault. I'm just saying. I waited till the last minute.
Okay.
And then I waited too long, and then I was like, okay, well, we'll change plans. And by the time I was like, oh man, I should grab a beer, it's like, no time. But anyway, I always love this tradition though. It's always spurred on a lot of good convos. Do you have thoughts to wrap it up, or do you want me to go first?
Why don't you go ahead and I'll see if I can come up with anything closing that will live up to closing remarks.
Well, I don't know what I have to say to wrap this one up. It's been a good exploration. I think that we covered a lot of subjects and a lot of topics, and we have maybe some analogies that people can walk away with, which is cool. I think, one of my big takeaways here is like, if you're of service, I suppose, if you look at yourself of service. And I think that's a good thing to do, to look at yourself of service, because being of service will give you a sense of value in this world. If you try to be valuable, you probably will find that you never feel valuable. But if you look at how you can be of service, you'll find that you have lots of value to bring, because there's lots of service that is needed and there's lots of problems that need to be solved. And if you can come along and provide that service or solve that problem, you're going to find out that you are quite valuable. And so when we're talking about this losses and limitations, if you feel like you lost maybe your role as serving a certain thing or solving a certain problem or being a certain person of sorts, I would say embrace that and look at it in terms of where can you provide value and service and what problems can you solve. If you go like, I need to solve this problem, and you're not really strong at that, don't do that. Like, that's something someone can help you solve that problem, or something out there can help you with that. Try to figure out where you can put your value and where you can put your service and energy. And if you don't have any, say, skills or abilities to do something, then I would go to, well, what am I interested in doing? What do I care about doing? And then if you're interested in that and you care about it, then put your energy into being great at that. Figure that out. So that might mean just read books, watch videos, learn, like do whatever you can to be an expert at that thing you're really interested in, and follow that curiosity and that passion. We've talked about this a lot, right? Do that and put your energy into that and become a resource in that area. And, you don't have to do it all. Just pick one thing to be somewhere where you can put value. And if you're seeing yourself limited or struggling, don't beat yourself up about that. It's very human. It's natural. It's part of the whole process. So, give yourself a break on that, and pick if you're just seeing all limitations, I guess what I would say is just pick the one thing that you want to work on, the one thing you want to do and be good at and be great at and build. You just got one thing that's an amazing thing. If you can offer one great thing to this world, just one, then you're a pretty special human being in this team. So that would be my advice moving forward. And yeah, and then, maybe you build one and you have time to build another, sure. But, you don't have to do it all. You just got to figure out how to do usually just one or two things well, and you will find that a lot of doors open up for you.
Yeah, simplifying and understanding what that means at a very individual, personal level, for sure. Two words really come to mind in terms of these sort of play between our losses and our limitations, and that's acceptance and honesty. Accepting and being honest about our losses, accepting and being honest about our limitations, and coming back to, at the beginning I mentioned like the symbol of like the yin yang. It's like within those losses, within those limitations, they contain their opposite. They contain their opposite within them. You will find a victory that occurred within a loss. You will find where you have strength within one of your limitations, right? These things operate as guideposts for us. These are things that are there for us. They're not things that are working against us. They are things that help us to come into closer relationship and contact with the people who we actually are, and how and the role that we have to play, I think, in the world, and how we can best help serve others as well as ourselves, right? I think that I don't think that those are mutually exclusive ideas. I do think that there is a meeting point where where we can best serve the world and where we find tremendous satisfaction, fulfillment, and joy. I do think that there's a place where that meets. They're one and the same thing. They're not different and opposing forces. And I think that that's like this whole thing of limitation. Like it's like, no, like they're part of the same thing, and they're all. It's not an one or the other. It's they come together, and together they form a whole picture. They complete the circle that actually helps you. And I think that if we can embrace that, accept that, then yeah, we can lead lives that are more authentic and joyful and bring joy to others as well. Thank you for listening in on our conversation today. We hope you found something helpful that you can carry forward with you. Head over to our website, wayoftheartist.com, for more free exclusive material and learn about the show. If you haven't already, please support us by subscribing to the show, sharing it with people you know, and keeping compassionate, creative conversation going.